Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar, From Policy to Action, Implementation of LAUSD's Black Educator Resolution. This webinar is co-sponsored by the Diversity and Leadership Institute and the Charting the Course to Equity Coalition. My name is Jennifer Childress, and I'm a founding member of the coalition, a passionate advocate for Black education, and a social impact strategy advisor. Now, before we get started, we would love to know who is joining us today. I know we have several folks on the Zoom, but first I'd like to recognize our coalition members, the Diversity and Leadership Institute, of course, the United Negro College Fund, Education Trust West, Teach for America Los Angeles, the Center for Powerful Public Schools, AXA, Families for Quality Schools Oakland, NCC, CCA, Innovate Public Schools, Loyola Marymount University, Education Leaders of Color, the Education Board Partners, and Energy Converters. And now, before I jump in, I'd love to invite community members, educators, parents, policymakers, advocates, researchers, those of us who I didn't mention, to share who you are and what your role is, if you feel comfortable. Anyone else want to jump in and say hello? Fair enough. So let's open it up today. We want to hear from one of the most important voices when it comes to public education, and that is a parent. Alberta Moore is an LAUSD parent and an LAUSD alum. And let's pause for a moment to hear from Alberta.
Hello, my name is Alberta Moore. I am a third generation LAUSD family. In the 80 years that my family has been engaged with LAUSD, there are many, many stories of amazing Black educators. I have a 16-year-old who's high functioning Asperger's. I have a 23-year-old that was gifted and talented, and I have a 29-year-old that went through the system also. There are many stories, but none more special and poignant than the story of my son, whose elementary school teachers, Mrs. Wafer and Mr. Robinson, not only embraced this child with Asperger's, but saw the potential. They saw his gifts, and not only did they give him structure and they gave him the motivation to learn, but they taught us as parents. My husband and I learned probably just as much as my son did. And I will remember always what Mr. Robinson told me. He said, Anderson has amazing gifts. Use his curiosity to learn how to educate him. Well, we followed his curiosity, and that has led us into so many amazing areas. Once again, he should graduate in 2023 with not only his high school diploma, but a AA from Trade Tech. He has a certificate in digital media. For this and for all the other compassionate things that these Black educators gave us, I say thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Moore. And that is exactly why this resolution is so important, why it's so important that we support students and we support educators. So today we are engaging in an important conversation about how we move from policy to action. So our goal today is first to bring together stakeholders to support in driving this resolution forward. That's all of you. Then we want to share some insights about how we got here, how we achieved successful passage of this resolution. And then third, we want to have a candid conversation about the opportunities and the challenges inherent in the implementation of a resolution like this one. Through all of this, we hope that by sharing the information, others might find opportunities to bring forward similar policies in their school districts. We'll be having two conversations. First, a fireside chat between Dr. Laura McGowan Robinson and LAUSD board member Tanya Ortiz-Franklin. We will also have a Q&A session at the end of these conversations. So please begin noting your questions as they arise. Feel free to add them to the chat anytime starting now, and we'll be collecting your questions throughout. So as questions bubble up, please, please, please make note of them, put them in the chat, write them down, and be ready to ask. Now, before we begin, I'd like to share a brief overview of the LAUSD resolution that we're going to be talking today, just to give context for everybody. So number one, what is the goal of the resolution? It is to increase the number of LA Unified's Black leaders, administrators, and teachers with an added focus on gender equity, and this will improve representation, relationships, and student outcomes. Now, what are the steps that the district will take to meet this goal? Step one, within 60 days of the resolution's passage, the Independent Analysis Unit, the IAU, will present to the board an initial analysis of the following: hiring rates for teachers and administrators, average teacher and principal tenure, teacher years of experience, sort of overall time in the district as a teacher, promotion rates of teachers and principals, perceptions of job satisfaction and support, and any other relevant factors that may impact Black student achievement. And then step two, within 90 days of receiving this report, the superintendent will develop and present a strategic plan in alignment with the Black Student Achievement Plan and the board goals. That creates cohesion across all the levels of the district. And the plan should accomplish the following: one, to increase the number of Black senior and executive leaders, administrators, teachers, and mental health professionals in the district. Two, to collaborate with community groups, educator associations, and professional associations. Three, to advocate in support of policy related to Black student achievement and fortifying pathways for Black educators. And finally, to leverage new and existing policy and funding to strengthen leadership pathways for Black educators. Now, that's a lot. If you are not familiar with the research or you'd like to dig in, you can head to Diversity and Leadership's website, diversityandleadership.org, to read in more details. Now I'd like to introduce our fireside chat presenters, excuse me. And that is, first of all, Tanya Ortiz-Franklin. She is the board member for LA Unified School District number 7. And she is also the author of the resolution that we're talking about today. Welcome, member Ortiz-Franklin. And then, of course, Dr. Laura McGowan Robinson. She is the founder and CEO of the Diversity and Leadership Institute. And her work centers around the identification, development, and support of racially diverse education leaders. She was very instrumental in supporting the effort to pass board member Ortiz-Franklin's resolution. So welcome, Dr. McGowan Robinson.
Good to be here.
Now, right off the top, Tanya, can you tell us briefly about why you authored this resolution and what it accomplishes, what it resolves to do, big picture for you?
Well, I could jokingly say because Laura asked us to, but I think that matters, right? When community comes to an elected official and says, here's an issue that really matters to us, will you take this on and be the champion and get your colleagues to agree? I think that's important. And you know, the district has spent, since the murder of George Floyd, about $90 million investing in Black student achievement, and not nearly the equivalent in thinking about the adults that are privileged to serve our students, and how often educators have some of those similar experiences that our students do when particularly they share identities like Black students and Black educators. So, you know, for me, as an elected official that represents South LA and Watts through the Harbor area, several schools that are benefiting from the Black Student Achievement Plan, but also several schools where there are few Black students, like in San Pedro or closer towards the South. It was important for me that the rest of my colleagues and LA Unified take a stand to say, just as our students are important and we are investing in their achievement and their future leadership, we need to invest in the leadership that is in our schools and our classrooms right here today. And so we worked on some language with some amazing community partners like DLI, heard from families, heard from students, heard from educators about what the board and the district could do intentionally to recruit and retain Black educators for every school. And so I think this is part of my own personal experience, having been a student in the district, having best friends whose kids go to the district now, having been a teacher in the district, but really the unique opportunity that the second largest school district in the country can say out loud and have the resources to support a commitment to intentionally bring folks in, bring Black educators into the district and figure out what it takes to retain and support their leadership in the classroom at the principalship level and really across all levels of the district, because representation matters. When we're making decisions about communities that we are not a part of, then we're maybe not making the best decisions. So for me, the more we can get representation at all levels of leadership, the better I think we'll do for our kids and honestly for our government and our country overall.
You know, it's so insightful. And I know you've been part of this work for such a long time, but it is so timely to be talking about our educators, especially after what they have been through the past several years. Dr. Laura, from where you sit as the founder and CEO of Diversity and Leadership Institute, why did you feel that this was necessary? Why now?
Yes, and this indeed was a collective effort by a lot of organizations, and all of those you mentioned at the top of this webinar. I see the success of Black students as the success of all students. And as a Black woman, my earliest experiences in public education were shaped by Black educators. They affirmed me, they saw me, they challenged me to be the best that I could be, and they demanded the best from me. Seeing them helped me see what I could accomplish. However, in California, and specifically in LAUSD, there will be students, Black students, other students of different races who never have access to a Black educator. And another reason why this is important is around the results, right? When it comes to achievement, studies have shown us that Black educators and educators of color more broadly have a very strong impact on students of color and all students. Black educators specifically have contributed to higher expectations in the classroom, higher college going rates, decreases in suspensions, and higher test scores for Black students. However, at the same time, we're in a crisis in this country and as a state when it comes to the educator shortage. And much like we've seen throughout the pandemic, the Black community has been disproportionately impacted. And this includes Black students and teachers. And so if we're talking about equity, we must invest the resources in the communities that need them and need them the most. And this includes addressing the root causes that got us here. Because what good is recruiting a workforce of Black educators if the conditions are such that they're not adequately supported, included, heard, or given opportunities to grow? This is why that data portion in the resolution is so important. We need to know where we are as a district when it comes to Black educators, what the need is, so that the superintendent and the rest of the staff and community can help address this specifically. And he can address this specifically in his plan. And I think the BSAP plan, as board member mentioned, along with other policies that specifically address the needs of Black students, are a great first step in LA Unified identifying the need to support Black students. And there are parents and community organizations and educators who are deeply invested in the success of Black students, and they recognize the need to address systemic issues that have led to the outcomes we see. There have been significant investments made. However, we know that we cannot do this work without the intentional and consistent engagement of Black educators. And I see this resolution as another way, another pathway to deepening the district's commitment to Black students by specifically addressing recruitment, preparation, and retention of Black educators.
You know, it's such a powerful statement that the second largest school district in the country has taken this on here at LA Unified School District. So tell us a little bit about the process, the advocacy. You know, it's fun to celebrate the wins, but we know that behind the successes is a lot of organizing, it's a lot of community building, it's a lot of work by a lot of different people. So I'll say both of you, but actually, you know, if board member Ortiz Franklin, if you tell us a little bit about what that process was like for you, how did it come to fruition? And then are there ways that people who are listening now who might not be from Los Angeles might sort of take away some of these learnings to their own school districts?
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting you called the beginning of the panel or the framing from policy to action. Well, it also starts with action before policy. And I think it starts with conversations. Honestly, at the same time that this movement was happening with several coalition members, my best friend who I met at an elementary school in LA Unified and whose kids now go to LA Unified is on their hiring committee. And she said, you know, my school, elementary school with about 35 teachers has no Black educator. Like that's a problem. Tanya, you're the school board member. You got to help make this a solution across the district that every school should have at least one Black educator, if not multiple, because my son deserves it. So, right, I'm having this personal conversation with my best friend. At the same time, several coalition members are saying across the country and across this state in particular, after the repercussions of the end of affirmative action, we have some intentional work to do to make up for some of the ills that we have collectively decided politically, you know, through the ballot box years ago. And it's still hard, right, with Proposition 209, trying to be very clear about that race matters. And even when you don't say race matters, it still matters. And it's just not in the right direction. So I was really grateful again for educators and families and community partners to say, we have an idea and we think that this is a direction that you could help champion for the school district. And so really it was through talking with folks. So there was some draft language that was shared with us as the nitty gritty of policymaking. And yes, community members can draft something for an elected official to react to. And it was so helpful to have the desires of the community written down. And my team and I looked and said, okay, what is within my purview as a board member? I'm not the superintendent, but I do get to supervise the superintendent and direct him to do some things. And given what the community would like to see and what I would like to see, where do we align and what can we push for? Now, the timing was really interesting as well, because I believe the conversation started last fall, but we didn't bring the resolution until February. And part of that was we were in a search for a new superintendent. And we thought it would be important to pass the resolution before the new superintendent came in to say, this is something we are committed to and that we're charging you with taking on. At the same time, being flexible and understanding that this new superintendent is going to be working on a strategic plan. And we expect that to come out in June. And so this resolution helps influence that strategic plan to say, this is an important part that you must consider, regardless of who the superintendent was going to be. But again, my role is not to say exactly how everything will be done, but that we are driven by data, we are driven by community, and we have a vision for what it could look like in the future. So giving that direction to our incoming superintendent was really important. So I'll say for folks in other districts who are interested in taking this on, it starts with talking to folks. What are the problems you're seeing in your community? What are some potential solutions? And who might be your allies who are elected officials who can make some policy about this? Thinking about what is their role, what is the role of the executor of their resolutions or motions, depending on what kind of a system they're in, and then really holding us accountable, because policy is just part of it. It's the follow through and the implementation that we're also going to need to be in coalition on to make sure that we are seeing the results that we're looking for.
I really love that you said it starts with action, and you said there's community, there's data, which really is about accountability, and then there's a vision for what it can look like, which is also a bit of accountability, but it also keeps us focused when we get tired, right? Because these things take a while, right? And as you said, there's implementation, which is what comes next, which is what we're going to be talking about next. But before we move on to that, Dr. Laura, anything you want to add about implementation, about coalition building, about the resolution?
I would say ditto to everything that board member Ortiz Franklin said. And I would also say that there may already be opportunities in folks' community where they can build upon something that already exists. And so for us, I would say before this resolution was the foundation of the work laid by organizations like Community Coalition, Brother, Son, Selves, Students Deserve, Innovate Parents, Inner City Struggle, Bean, and so many other organizations that we don't have time enough to name, but the list goes on, and individuals, parents, and the like, who brought forward the HEAT plan, the validated plan, the Black student, all of these plans centered around addressing longstanding systemic issues that have gotten in the way of Black students' success. Our students are brilliant. We just need to provide everything, that all of the resources that they need in order for them to continue to grow and thrive. So many of those organizations supported in this resolution and bringing this forward. So I would say identify community and education organizations that have a vested interest in racial and educational equity. If you're centering the Black child specifically, make sure that that is the center of your conversations, and leveraging policy and practice to improve the outcomes for students. So bringing these groups together, like you said, Board Member Ortiz-Franklin, it starts with the conversation, and I'll leave it there.
Wonderful. And before we close out this discussion, let's talk quickly about the vision, big picture. What is the most significant change? And I'm going to give this to both of you, and I'm going to ask you to keep your responses short so we can jump into the implementation conversation. But what is the most significant change that you hope to see when this resolution is fully implemented? What is the end game here? What does that look like for our students, for our parents, for our community?
I'll say for our students, TK through adult education, the nearly 500,000 of them, they all have more than one Black educator during their experience with us. And that for every Black educator in our system, they're never alone on a campus or in an office. And I'll say for our Black families and also our non-Black families, that there's growing recognition, compassion, and a real thinking about what diversity, equity, and inclusion looks like for a phenomenal district like LA Unified can absolutely be.
And I'll end how I started. As I said before, I believe the success of Black students is the success of all students, and that this resolution is a part of a broader effort. I believe in disrupting status quo, things that haven't necessarily served Black students well for generations, and us beginning to push back on things that have not worked, but starting to bring in innovative and new approaches that are responsive, culturally responsive to Black students, Black families, and Black educators, and ultimately all families, all students, and all educators. And with this resolution fully implemented, I would expect to see Black educators represented in every area of the district, leading with culturally responsive ways to support in the success of not only, as I said before, Black students, but all students. And I want to see the conditions, policy and otherwise, for Black educators to be prepared, recruited, sustained, and supported. Ultimately, I want to see Black students in LA Unified learning, growing, and thriving.
So well said, both of you. As we know, all students do better when there are leaders and teachers of color in the classroom and Black educators. And thank you so much to both of you for being here, for getting into the nitty-gritty with us. Everyone, Dr. Laura McGowan Robinson and Board Member Tanya Ortiz-Franklin. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to kick it off into the next part of our conversation, which is going to be the implementation conversation. And leading that discussion will be Dr. Meredith Anderson, who represents a coalition member and an amazing leader in the field, and that is the United Negro College Fund. So Dr. Meredith Anderson, welcome.
Thank you, Jennifer. And just thank you just for leading an excellent discussion. I think, you know, Dr. McGowan Robinson said it best, that our children are brilliant, and we want to make sure that they're uplifted and supported with this resolution. So thank you. So I'm excited to moderate a great panel for everyone today. Again, just thank you to DLI for inviting us and having this important conversation. The objective of this particular panel is to really have a candid discussion about the opportunities, but also some of the challenges inherent in the implementation of this resolution. We'll start off with a brief discussion, followed by a question and answer. So a couple of housekeeping rules, as Jennifer said, if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat as we're having the discussion, and we'll get to those at the end. So we'll go ahead and introduce our panelists. We have a great group of policy advocates, district staff, representation. So again, happy to start this conversation. So first we have Dr. Jared Dupree, and he is the Senior Director in the Office of the LAUSD Superintendent. Next, we have Dr. Robert Whitman, who is administrator for LAUSD, Fremont Community of Schools. Next, we also have Ms. Sarah Lillis, who is the executive director of Teach Plus California. And next, we have Blane Watson, who is the Region 5 director of the California Association of Latino Administrators. So welcome. So we're glad to have this conversation, excited to just get into some of the details of this implementation of the resolution. So again, just wanted to start off talking about why we have this resolution. So I want to start with Dr. Whitman and Sarah. So from your perspective, why is this resolution or an intentional focus on Black educators important and necessary?
All right, thank you, Meredith. Well, we see firsthand right now that we have fewer Black educators getting into the profession. We see that on a national level. We see it right here in LA, and it's probably worse here in LA due to the cost of living. And then the resolution speaks about, Black educator representation at multiple levels, at the teacher level, as well as at the district level, particularly in senior leadership. We know that is very important. Right now in our district, we have very few African Americans who are sitting at the senior leadership table. And their voice is the voice of Black educators is very, very important, particularly when we're talking about decisions related to Black children and their families and their overall well-being. And so it's very important that we have representation within our district as it relates to Black students. And so that is the representation is important. And it was mentioned before, when we have Black educators in the classroom, when we have, Black leaders in our schools and at the different levels within our district, it makes a difference. It can make a huge difference in terms of, our kids' self-perceptions of themselves, us being more deliberate and intentional about providing resources and access to different opportunities for our Black students. And so it was mentioned before from our previous panelists, is that when we are addressing the needs of Black students in this district have been the most historically underserved, the boat rises for every student in our district. And so I think that this resolution is timely. I applaud our board member, Ortiz Franklin, for the audacity that she has to be able to put something forward and be very strategic in her thinking about it. And so I just want to, again, I can't stress enough the importance of this resolution. And, the Black educator's perspective is more than noteworthy, and it's important that there is representation. And I think that's what this resolution does.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Sarah, what's your perspective here as well?
Thank you so much. It's difficult for me to add to what Dr. Whitman and our first panelists have already said, but as it relates to the opportunities and outcomes for our Black students and all students in LAUSD. But as a teacher leadership organization, we've spent a lot of time talking with teachers of color, particularly Black teachers, about what they need. And I think what's really exciting about this resolution is it's not just about building a diverse educator workforce. It's really about building a sustainable, thriving, diverse educator workforce, and really intentional in how it's approaching that work. And when we've talked with Black educators in our focus groups, they've made clear how critical it is for them to teach in a school with a diverse faculty, including school leaders. Black teachers who work with educators who look like them, they share experiences, support each other, provide mentorship, and have conversations that empower them to be bold, multifaceted educators who create educational learning experiences that inspire students. And so when they're part of a faculty from diverse backgrounds, they report feeling less tokenized or isolated, and that really transforms their experience as educators and the experience for their students. And so the work the district is doing around not only the educator diversity resolution, but the Black Student Achievement Plan is a great start. And I think we cannot truly address the needs of Black students without ensuring a strong Black educator pipeline encompassing all grades and subjects, including administrators. So we're really excited about the potential for this resolution.
Yes, and I think you both highlighted the importance of hearing teachers, hearing their voices, making sure that the community is heard, like we talked about in the previous panel. I want to shift to Blane. So as an administrator in a district that implemented a policy or a practice around this intentional recruitment and preparation of Black male educators, So why do you think this resolution is important?
Absolutely. Thank you. Number one, thank you everybody for the great comments and the vision and the opportunity to be here to talk about, as Robert said, this is a very audacious work. Thank you, Tanya, for your leadership. This is very important work. I will say that my leadership in this work really started a few years ago when I was principal at Dominguez High School. We led the Compton Male Teacher of Color Network in Compton. And this was a 3-year grant that focused on the recruitment and retention, and I want to say the sustaining of male teachers of color in Compton Unified. It was a collaboration between CSUN, UC Berkeley, and funded by the Federal Charitable Foundation and the California Community Foundation. Some of the essential elements, and you're talking about the importance of listening to teachers. So I wanted to make sure that I kind of talked about these elements and why they're important, how it really opened my eyes, not just as a Black male in education, but the needs of the teachers that we're serving. Some of the essential elements of the Compton Male Teacher of Color Network model were mentoring and coaching. We met on Saturdays for affinity group meetings in which we talked about and we developed we fostered a sense of belonging for these male teachers. We discussed different protocols for exploring problems of practice, instructionally, and also leadership in the schools that we're serving. We did peer observation and reflection. And then we talked a lot about the doors that were either open or not open to career advancement within the organization. And that was important because it opened up a lot of eyes in terms of what male teachers of color were feeling, what they needed, and what we had to do specifically as administrators to help open those doors. The resolution is important because in thinking about this work, because number one, it underscores the correlation of Black educator support systems in an organization to Black student achievement, excuse me. Secondly, I want to say it also prioritizes and calls for a strict focus on district coherence or organizational alignment to support and sustain existing Black educators. Really, it's about the systems that support Black educators in the organization. Third, I would also say it requires a comprehensive and focused interrogation of the organizational conditions and the organizational climate for Black educators across the district. And lastly, I will say that the resolution calls for innovation in the planning and execution of effective Black educator recruitment strategy. Talking about LCAP goals, activities, and revenue allocation from the state level, federal level, and also grant funding. Also talks, I think this is really connected to district office coherence. I mentioned that before. From the board of trustees, the superintendent must also support the priority of this alignment between human resources, the induction department, ed services, business services, all of these organizations, all these systems in the organization need to be connected. And I will leave us with two essential questions that I think that this really let me think about and I want to explore deeper through the work of the resolution is number one, do the organizational conditions in LAUSD support Black educators? Do Black educators have a sense of belonging? Do they have access to career advancement, et cetera? And secondly, how will each department within the organization, within the district, commit to the planning and alignment of priorities to recruit and sustain effective Black educators in LAUSD? Thank you.
Thank you, Blane. And I think it's important, again, that we have those critical conversations that we're asking as we're thinking about going from the resolution to implementation. So Dr. Dupree, I just want to ask you, how does this resolution align with the Black Student Achievement Plan?
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. And also thank you for the invitation to be here and joining this conversation. And before I answer your question, Dr. Anderson, I don't want to gloss over the fact that we can even say that there's a Black Student Achievement Plan. Like, I really want us to sink in and allow that to really sit with us in terms of its historic significance, Black Student Achievement Plan. So there are multiple points of intersection between the BSAP and this resolution. I'm going to speak briefly to a few. The first is this concept of student readiness. In order to recruit and retain skilled Black educators, there first must be a university pool to choose from. Currently, only 28.2% of all Black students in LAUSD are eligible for that university pool. So the BSAP addresses university readiness, K through 12 university readiness, ensuring that our Black students are academically prepared for the rigors of college the demands of college. Not only that they are familiar with college mentoring and also university partnerships. So that's the first piece. The second piece, Dr. Anderson, is that the BSAP explicitly calls for the development of university pipelines, university residency programs targeting Black educators. To date, we have one current residency program targeting Black educators with USC. We're in conversations with other universities in the area. The third point of intersection, Dr. Anderson, is this idea of Black educators being the primary torchbearers of culturally responsive practices at their schools. The BSAP, one of the hallmarks of the BSAP is increasing pedagogy and curriculum design aligned with culturally responsive practices. And often, once again, the Black educators are the torchbearers. They're not the sole torchbearers, but they are the primary torchbearers of this effort. So the BSAP, multiple alignments between the BSAP and the resolution.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree. And I think, again, those residency programs are important, and think about these pipelines. So I want us to kind of pivot to a survey that we conducted. So we surveyed educators and advocates local and statewide to really get their thoughts on the potential barriers that the district might encounter as they implement this resolution. So the top 3 barriers identified were: 1, lack of clear leadership, really thinking about the ownership and accountability for the policy and its implementation; 2, some of the internal red tape inherent, within a bureaucracy, but then also at the school site level. And then 3rd, legal challenges to race-conscious policies or practices, excuse me, via Proposition 209. So in thinking about that, I want to go again to you, Dr. Dupree. So considering your role with the district and drawing from your experience leading implementation of this BSAP plan that you just talked about, can you kind of speak about some of the concerns around leadership?
Yes, Dr. Anderson. So we know that leadership is probably the most important part from moving a vision and a concept to reality. The Superintendent Carvalho, has already begun to move on this resolution. The first thing is assigning a point. Without a designated point, this will just be a conversation. It'll be an ongoing conversation. So he has already assigned a point. So I will serve as the point to ensure implementation. I will also work alongside my colleague, Dr. Kenya Williams. I hope you're listening out there, Dr. Williams, who will also lead this effort. Leadership, Dr. Anderson, also involves ensuring that there is a common understanding about this resolution, not just in the SUP's office, not just in local district leadership, not just in the board offices, but also every facet of the district, school sites everywhere. There's a common understanding about our objective and about our charge. And then not just that, leadership also requires a development of a plan, a shared vision in which all stakeholders come together to construct that, which is essential to the actual implementation and execution of the plan. And then timely monitoring. Board member Ortiz Franklin, and also I believe it was our moderator at the beginning, spoke about the different facets of the plan, ensuring that we have quantifiable metrics. Leadership, you establish a baseline, you establish a plan, and then you make goals and you monitor that and you provide feedback. So to your question, Dr. Anderson, in the absence of leadership, this is not going to happen. We'll just have these circular conversations, which we as a team will not do.
Thank you. And you kind of answered the second follow-up question was about, essentially the accountability, but you talked about the metrics and the persistent monitoring. So thank you for that. And I want to pivot again to Dr. Whitman, but also Dr. Dupree as well. So another concern, again, we talked about in the survey was this red tape or bureaucracy. So Dr. Whitman, as an administrator, you might find yourself on the receiving end of district policies that you were asked to implement, at your school site. So what do administrators need from the district in order to really ensure that you're equipped to implement the policies that will be developed as a result of this resolution?
All right, thank you for that question. I think that we need effective principal and school-based leadership at our schools. Dr. Dupree mentioned it before. We can't do anything if we don't start there. That's very critical. In addition to that, priority staffing. Like when we talk about Black students and particularly Black students who are attending schools in some of our most historically underserved communities. If we're trying to, make progress in, for example, ELA and math and other, areas within our schools, we got to make sure that we have priority staffing. We have to have effective teachers, and we have to really shine a light on that. And I like where our new superintendent, Mr. Carvalho, is going in terms of ensuring that that's happening and being very intentional. In addition to that, I want to call out a true, authentic voice in district policies. One size does not fit all in education. And when we tried to do that, we've run into many roadblocks. And so it's very important that, people at the district level and the senior leadership level, that they're truly listening to the boots on the ground, to our principals, to our principal supervisors, what have you, so that we can really make adjustments to policies. Because sometimes, policies are intended to do good things, but oftentimes we need to make adjustments because there's no one size fits all. And right now, and it was mentioned before, like we have unprecedented amounts of money within our district, at least at the moment. And a lot of that money is focused on the achievement of Black students. One of the biggest barriers that often get in the way is procurement. How do we make sure that we're, expediting, different programs and different, resources that we want to implement within our school sites. And so thinking about how we're, providing for flexibility in terms of how we're able to spend money and things of that nature. And I know there's a lot of, guardrails to that for good reason, but rethinking how we might be able to, expedite that process to ensure that we're getting resources to the schools that need them most.
Absolutely, absolutely. And briefly, Dr. Dupree, if you can just tell us just in about 1 minute or so, what do you think the district will do to ensure that this red tape or bureaucracy really don't impede forward movement of the resolution, not only again at the district level, but also when we're talking about on the school level?
Right. Thank you, Dr. Anderson. So the first thing we need to do is understand the owners of the bureaucracy and the owners of the red tape. Dr. Whitman talked about streamlining policies, and we can absolutely do that. But we can also work aggressively to redefine policy in conjunction with the board if it's an LAUSD policy, right? And if it's LAUSD red tape, then we created that, which means that we can redraft it and we can reconstruct it. So truly understanding the owner of the policy. If it's at the state level, then we need to come together and advocate. But if it's our red tape, if it's our bureaucracy, we have a couple options. We can recreate, redraft, we can circumvent, of course, ensuring that we're not violating existing ed code, state regulations, and things of that sort. So identifying the owner, Dr. Anderson, and then really thinking about, we have the onus and we have the ability to recreate it. It's our district.
Okay, thank you, thank you. And Sarah, I just want to shift gears a little bit to talk about some of the legal barriers. So in your experience as a seasoned policy expert and advocate, can legal challenges pose a real threat to this policy implementation? And if so, how can policymakers guard against some of these legal challenges?
Thank you so much. I think the shroud of Proposition 209 certainly looms over this whole conversation. And I think Dr. Dupree referenced sort of being aware of both where the change can happen and where the barriers are. Since California voters approved Prop 209 in 1996, this restrictive law, which I think most folks recognize as a ban on affirmative action, has really limited policymakers and advocates and leaders from addressing systemic inequity. And unfortunately, the recent effort to repeal it in the 2020 election was unsuccessful. I hope that so it remains a barrier, and I hope there are ongoing conversations and efforts to remove it, but I don't think it completely limits our ability to move forward with this resolution. As it's written, Prop 209 prohibits the state from discriminating against or granting preferential treatment to any individual or group based on race, ethnicity, or gender in public employment, public education, and public contracting. And since there are already protections against discrimination in the US and the California Constitution, the really consequential part of this is the preferential treatment idea. And so there is some room for interpretation within that, within Prop 209 about what we mean by preferential treatment, although the courts have certainly opined. But so under Prop 209, there is room for governmental entities to initiate a variety of programs that can address longstanding effects of structural racism in public education. They can put forward race-conscious approaches to recruitment and support services and programs designed to improve opportunities for students. So I think there is room for this resolution to move forward. But I think it's also essential that to the comments earlier that we really have a collaborative planning process so we can innovate. So it is not, so we're really bringing in voices of the educators and the folks on the ground and families to think through what are some innovative approaches to moving forward with this race conscious work while being mindful of the lines that Prop 209 has created. I think historically throughout the state, the chilling effect of Prop 209 is beyond the legal barriers. And it's mostly, we've seen places in the state where folks are reluctant to even talk about race. And we recognize that if we don't speak about longstanding and persistent ethno-racial inequities, we can't act on them. And if we don't act on them, there's no opportunity to eliminate them. And we've clearly seen in LAUSD, we're not afraid to talk about them and to name them and to develop plans to address them. And so we're, with the leadership of board member Ortiz Franklin and her colleagues, I think we're on our way. And there is room to move forward, but being mindful of what the limitations are from the constitutional amendment of Prop 209.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. And I think you bring up a great point. It takes the will to actually talk about these issues and not, push them under the rug. And so getting to that, Blane, earlier you talked a little bit about your involvement in the implementation of a Compton Unified policy and retention policy around recruitment and retention of Black male educators. So what was the most significant barrier and challenge to implementation in that context and why?
Yeah, I want to be clear. There was no clear policy that was articulated in Compton Unified. This was more of a project, and that was part of the challenge, right? We didn't necessarily have teeth to sustain the work. But what I do understand is that research and practice has taught me, and we talked about it earlier, that equity-focused change in schools is pedagogical. It's about curriculum, it's about structure, and it's about procedures. I've also learned that a district's commitment or lack of commitment to a strategy and practice is an example of its symbolic leadership and the organizational culture. Culture being its routines, its rituals, practices, and the tradition. They all influence the organizational climate for educators of color, right? In this case, how do Black educators of color feel, right? That's Black educators feel in LAUSD. So I would say that the most significant barriers to implementing the Compton Male Teacher of Color Network model were about our procedures and structures. There's little support or commitment of the vision for this network, this Compton Male Teacher of Color Network, from the Board of Trustees and also from the central office. Specifically, no organizational systems approach for district coherence through offices and divisions that can directly support male teachers of color. An example, male teachers of color in my opinion, can be targeted for training as teacher induction mentors through human resources. I tried to push this work, but got a lot of pushback in trying to find more leadership opportunities for male teachers of color. One specifically, a central office leader told me after inquiring about more systems and procedures and structures, this person told me, quote, "This is your project." This person made me feel like I was completely on my own, right? And I'm leading as a principal, trying to lead this initiative. So to be very, very clear here, we're talking about the procedures and structures. There was no district commitment to strategy. So there's no invitation to collaborate on the initiative through the district LCAP. All right. Number two, human and fiscal resource allocation. I think Robert or Jared mentioned it earlier, right? You have to have a point, you have to have a lead, right? To develop a plan that can be evaluated and sustained. Also talking about fiscal resource allocation. In Compton, there was little to no district financial commitment to the initiative. The only commitment was paying teachers extra duty pay on the weekends when they were attending our Saturday affinity groups. We had a grant for about $54,000 over 3 years. But the fear I had was, beyond these 3 years, how are we going to sustain this work when the grant runs out? And I inquired several times about Title II, right, funding in the district. Where is our Title II money going? I understand that Title II serves a purpose of providing supplemental activities that strengthen the quality and effectiveness of teachers and principals and other school leaders. But again, the question was, how are we using our Title II monies? What is that looking like to support the Male Teacher of Color Initiative in Compton? So again, to be very clear here, Dr. Anderson, my real concern and the challenge I was really confronted with was around procedures and structures. That all has everything to do with organizational leadership.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, going back to the leadership and having that accountability, but also systems. And so just lastly, I wanted to shift to thinking about the community, right? So there are so many people in communities who are part of this movement. And in order to be effective, we have to put the right kind of pressure on decision makers. So Dr. Dupree, with respect to parent engagement, how might parents like Alberta that we heard earlier advocate in powerful ways?
There are several things parents can do, Dr. Anderson. One thing is we're going to create a steering committee for this resolution. So parents, and we'll send out information through board channels and different community organizations about how they can participate. The BSAP would not be where it is without our steering committee, which is comprised of parents, community organization members, and also students. So that's one thing. The other thing that I would encourage parents to do is to advocate at their school sites, wherever they are, engage in this conversation, not just at this webinar level, right? Not just at the district level, have ongoing conversations with your school teams, your school principals, your COSAs and your local districts. And the other thing is working with Dr. Williams, we're going to have focus group meetings as we develop this plan. We encourage parents to participate in those focus group meetings.
Thank you. Thank you. And briefly, since I know we're a little short on time, we want to get to questions. Sarah, Blane, how might educators and advocates join this effort?
I'll take all the time just deferring to the other person. I'll go quickly. I think that I'm very encouraged and excited to hear Dr. Dupree talk about the structures that the district is putting in place. And I think as much as educators can take advantage of those formal structures, please do. But I also would say, similar to his recommendation for parents, speaking with your site administrator, speaking with your local district leaders, I think this is a conversation that we need to be having at all levels. Through formal structures, through partner organizations and your union representatives. And I think we need to be talking about this all together, but really being intentional about finding those windows for really concrete planning and thinking through how this aligns to other plans, to the LCAP process, to where there are all these formal structures that are already in place. If we are really going to center Black student achievement and the retention and the recruitment and retention of a diverse workforce, that it needs to be at the table for all of these conversations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. I would agree with that. I think also educators and advocates can join by, number one, advocating for an LAUSD LCAP audit to identify specific goals, strategies, and resource allocation that are aligned to recruitment and sustaining Black educators in LAUSD. I mentioned earlier the idea of district coherence, to making sure that the strategy is connecting and there's very clear alignment and connection between, or coherence between, the different divisions of the organization to support Black educators. And thirdly, I'm very proud to announce that in January of this year, 2022, I would ask that advocates and educators support the new Los Angeles Unified School District Male Teacher of Color Network. This initiative was started this year, funded by a 2-year grant by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. I want to elevate a few leaders here in LAUSD that are doing this incredible work. I'm also one of the trainers in this work, but Dr. Marco Nava, HR administrator, Dr. Patricia Pernin, LAUSD admin coordinator in credentialing and added authorization program, and Mr. Mark Duncan, also administrator leading this work. The outcomes of this work really about training 80 principals and APs on racial informed training. 140 induction mentors are being trained. We really want to impact students. And this is, like Robert mentioned earlier, and I think Jared also mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that the training has to come from the top. Leaders need to be trained in this work and the models that can exist with affinity work and the powerful impact it can have, not just on the students, but also on the educators that are receiving this training and the educators that actually have to support this work at their school sites or across the organization. So I just want to elevate this work. This is wonderful work that's happening right now. And I want to see if this work can be connected to the BSAP in any way, if possible.
Thank you. Thank you, Blane. And thank you, Sarah. And thank you all again for this great discussion. We're going to pivot to some of the audience questions because I know we're short on time. So the first question is, what is the status of the IAU analysis, since I believe the 60-day timeline has passed?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. We were actually just checking in with our team. We meet with the IAU, which is the independent analysis unit that actually reports directly to the board, not to the superintendent, which is great because when we ask for data, we should get sort of an unbiased and an unfiltered view on things. So the quantitative data is a little easier. How many people are in which positions across which local districts? And some interesting early insights are, as folks might predict, local district West and local district South have a lot more Black educators, both in the classroom and at the school leadership level, and has already been noted at the highest levels of the district, the proportionality is much lower than we would like to see. So some of that early data should be coming out soon. I was putting in the chat that I just asked the IAU to send it out to all board members right away. What's a little harder is the satisfaction and the perception data. The question is whether we actually gather it well right now. We have a school experience survey that can be broken down by race, but the question is, do those questions get at what we're trying to get at? And so the team is still sort of working through that. But the team is right. And I think to the point of accountability, follow up with your elected officials, because that is a big part of our job, is following up on the implementation with things. The 60th day was April 8th, and we're getting close to the 90th day for the data to be included and incorporated. So Jared, expect some data coming your way soon.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we have another question. So if you could please discuss some of the supports that will be provided to African-American administrators to become successful leaders. So they said it appears there's not enough support available, but when something goes wrong, they're the first blame. So can somebody kind of talk about those supports?
I'll take a stab at it. And so one of the things that resonates with me right now is, Jared mentioned and Blane, they both mentioned the mentoring. I think that's a phenomenal resource and support. Authentic, genuine mentorship where Black administrators feel comfortable, talking about, real problems that they're experiencing at their school without any type of fear of any type of, reprisals or anything of that nature. But the voice, like really listening to the voice of Black educators, Black administrators, that's very important. Oftentimes decisions are made, and I mentioned it before, we talked about red tape and different policies and how their, principals are expected to execute. But you have to take into account that there are real issues that are facing our community, and there are different things that there are different adjustments that need to be made with policies to ensure that we're accounting for the uniqueness within our school systems. And so yes, we have expectations. We have high expectations for our kids, and we know our kids are very capable, but we need to make sure that we're listening to the what the actual needs are within the community, so that we can make adjustments to resources, to how things are allocated, and not just giving someone the same resources or the same policy or what have you, and expect them to be able to execute the results that are the desired outcomes and results. And so listening to the Black educators, that's very critical, because oftentimes we don't do that, and historically we haven't done that in our district. We haven't done a very good job of being good listeners, and that's very critical, because if we don't listen, then we cannot make adjustments, the necessary adjustments along the way to ensure that initiatives are being carried out with fidelity.
Thank you, Dr. Whitman. And just in lieu of time, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Laura. I know we have several questions that weren't answered, but we'll pass it over and possibly have some of our panelists address those at a later time if possible.
Thank you, Meredith. There was one question that came in from Monique at the end, and I know that the IAU is doing their report right now to get an answer to this question, but I did want to make sure that we addressed it, as it's in the chat, about the root causes that we talked about earlier, Board Member Otis Franklin, around why Black educators are leaving the district.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many reasons, and part of it is like we need to break that down and have really targeted solutions. Salary comes up as one, childcare, the cost of education, housing and living in Los Angeles, and then just the cultural taxing of being the person that the behavior challenges are sent to, or talking with certain families because you have an affinity, and so you might be able to approach the family in a different way. So, I think part of that is what has to come out, and I appreciate Dr. Whitman saying we have to listen more to Black educators, educators, and non-Black staff members also have to step up and notice more and step in when things feel like there are extra pressures on our Black staff members and offer to take things on that can't just be assumed to go to certain folks because they share an affinity.
Thank you so much for that. And we're looking, and thank you so much for your participation and your leadership on the resolution. It's been a pleasure working with you and all of our community partners coming together on this issue. Thank you so much. So we are coming toward the end of our time together today. I so appreciate all of our panelists and presenters and our audience members engaging in this. We are dropping a link for you all who may be interested in engaging more specifically on this resolution and an upcoming opportunity to engage in an action coming forward. Also, to move forward, wanting to make sure that we reiterate some of the key points that came out of our discussion. We want to make sure that not only are we creating the policy, but the practices and the infrastructure to ensure the success of Black educators so that they thrive in the district. Wanting to make sure that we are creating pathways for all community members to engage when these policies present themselves, or how we are including our voices, how our voices and our opinions and thoughts are being included in the implementation. So we'll make sure that you have the link, should already be in the chat. And we also have a commitment from Dr. Dupree to reconvene another conversation. Many of you said that you want to directly engage. And so we will make sure that we create the platform and the opportunity for open engagement in future conversations. And we're looking forward to many of the participants and panelists who were on this webinar today to come back and talk about the implementation of the Black Educator Resolution in months to come. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your week and a great weekend. Thank you again.